we are going off into our feature that we call The Big Story. And as I intimated earlier, we will be this morning looking at the matter of the repatriation of Haitians who arrived in eastern Portland recently back to Haiti. Something that is making a number of Jamaicans unhappy at the undue haste in which the government has been returning these Haitians whenever they arrive. The backstory: the Jamaican government's decision to repatriate 20 Haitians who landed illegally in East Portland has sparked controversy. Malene Alleyne, founder of Freedom Imaginaries, who is an international human rights attorney, has criticized the government's draconian approach and lack of due process in this situation. Over 150 Haitians have been collectively expelled since back in July 2023 until now, raising concerns about Jamaica's obligations under international law and its constitution. This morning we're pleased to welcome her once again, Malene Alleyne. Good morning, Miss Alleyne. How are you doing today? I'm sorry. Okay, are you there? Let me hear you. Are you
Yes, I'm here. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you now. Thank you so very, very much for joining us once again. This matter, again, has reared its ugly head, as you maybe would want to put it, and we see a number of Haitians being repatriated back to Haiti within days after their arrival in Jamaica. It has not pleased you one bit, has it?
No, what we're seeing now is a systematic pattern and practice. And by my count and based on our monitoring, we are now at 150 Haitians collectively expelled from Jamaica without due process, without access to an attorney, without access to the courts, and without access to a procedure to determine whether they are asylum seekers or other vulnerable migrants in need of protection.
You use the term due process. What would that entail?
That would entail a number of things. First of all, our constitution is very clear. It's non-controversial. At the very least, they would have a right to communicate with an attorney and have recourse to legal remedies and to the courts. But what I argue is part of that due process must also incorporate what's under Jamaica's refugee policy. And under that policy, they have a right to seek asylum and they have a right to have their claims determined. And they have a right to be informed of their right to seek asylum. And, I'm reading reports about this recent group and what I know of other groups as well. They're telling immigration officers, please help us. We want to seek asylum. Some of them don't use the words asylum. Some of them do. They explicitly say, we want to seek asylum. We are fleeing violence and rape and murders and gang violence in Haiti. Please help us. But they're being turned back. And so what we have is not only a violation of the due process rights, but a very serious disintegration in the rule of law, because it is a willful disregard for the rule of law in terms of our domestic law and in terms of international law, which is the Refugee Convention, which says you are not to return persons to a place where they could face persecution. And we know that Haiti is that place because the UN reporting on the situation is very clear.
So the Minister of National Security here used terms like risks associated with Haitian migrants, which is a strong part of their argument in terms of why they are continuing to repatriate these Haitians. You don't buy that argument?
Well, what they're describing is the collective designation of an entire national group as a disfavored group. They are collectively painting all Haitians as risky, when what should be happening is that each person should get an individualized assessment to determine whether each person coming is eligible for refugee status. And I want to emphasize that under the Refugee Convention, which Jamaica has ratified, you can only be excluded from refugee status under a limited framework of exclusion, which excludes persons who are, who have committed serious crimes. Mm-hmm. And that's why we call for an individualized assessment. And I want to make it clear that Freedom Imaginaries is not advocating for the wholesale, to completely disregard any type of screening. What we are advocating for is a process. And what we're saying is assess their claims, through that screening process, you will determine whether some persons have legitimate asylum claims, and you treat those differently. You would determine whether some people are victims of human trafficking and in need of urgent protection, and you deal with them separately. You would determine whether there are children in the group who are extremely vulnerable and you need to deal with separately. But when you have this type of collective punishment and collective expulsion without that individualized assessment, the risk is that you are sending back to Haiti persons with legitimate claims and who will possibly be killed upon arrival and face other forms of persecution. So this collective treatment is, first of all, is unconstitutional and contrary to international law, but it's also just doesn't make sense.
Ms. Alleyne, explain to us how the principle of non-penalization for irregular entry apply in this case.
What the Refugee Convention says is that asylum seekers are not to be penalized because of a breach of entry requirements, because we realize that persons fleeing persecution in a context like Haiti, where you have gang violence, wreaking havoc in communities, gangs using systematic practices of sexual violence to intimidate populations and burning entire communities. They're not going to take an expensive commercial flight. They're fleeing. And so the Refugee Convention recognizes that for some of them, that will happen irregularly in these unseaworthy boats crossing treacherous seas. And for that reason, the Refugee Convention says, do not penalize them by detaining them. Do not penalize them by criminally prosecuting them, as Jamaica has been doing. Do not penalize them by excluding them from consideration of refugee status. Jamaica is doing quite the opposite, because Jamaica has two approaches, basically, to Haitians seeking refuge. One is to collectively expel them without due process, and the second is to detain them in these police station lockups in conditions which I believe rise to the level of inhuman and degrading treatment and possibly even torture.
Mm-hmm. Based on your assessment, Ms. Alleyne, I get the feeling that you would be of the view that there's sort of an imbalance between the whole matter of national security concerns as expressed by the government and the matter of humanitarian obligations towards asylum seekers. You see it that way, don't you?
Yes, I do. And I want to make clear that I understand the complexities of managing mixed migratory flows. And I understand that, authorities need to take certain actions in terms of security and law enforcement. All we are asking for is a more balanced approach that balances, security interests with obligations under the Constitution and international law, which are not controversial. Like the right to speak with an attorney is not a controversial right. And so if we can even find consensus on certain non-controversial items, for example, access to an attorney at law. And another point I want to mention is this thing of separating families. Because another approach that Jamaica takes to Haitians who seek refuge is to detain the parents and separate the children from them and place them in state facilities far away and not arrange for any type of communication. So I have Haitian mothers who have been separated from their children for months, who have no communication with their children outside of court, like when they're appearing before a judge and they glimpse them in court. I have a Haitian mother who's been separated from her two children for over 4 months, and she doesn't even know where they are. We have reached out to the relevant authority asking, where are these children? And the mother doesn't know where they are. And this is so reminiscent of what happened in the United States with Trump's very draconian and unlawful policy of family separation, child separation. And the international community was incensed. Here in Jamaica, we have a government that's doing a similar thing to our fellow Haitians, who, by the way, are CARICOM nationals, and so who would be entitled to, treatment that is consistent with the sense of belonging to which they're entitled. So we must find a middle ground that protects women, children, vulnerable groups, and that upholds the rule of law. I would say this is probably one of the most critical human rights crises to hit Jamaica, and how we come out of it will define who we are as a country.
All right. By the way, listeners, if you have a comment, you can always reach us throughout this conversation on 876-861-4753, or you can reach us on 877-255-3086. Miss Alleyne, when these Haitians arrive, have you, say, attempted to, or are you even allowed to intervene or have a conversation with these refugees?
I am denied access, and as a matter of principle, the most important thing I can do as a human rights lawyer is show up for Haitians fleeing persecution and seeking refuge in Jamaica. But when I do, I'm denied access, and so even with the latest group that arrived, I went to the Port Antonio police station to try to speak with them. Officers there confirmed that the Haitians were there, but that I couldn't speak with them. And I waited. I was there from around noon, and I waited until about 6 p.m. when I saw a convoy taking out a group, which I assumed to be the Haitians, taking them to an undisclosed location, which I later come to realize was to the Coast Guard vessel for them to be returned to Haiti. And I just want to say too that I was told and given the impression that the Haitians would have stayed there overnight, and I took the officers at their word. And what I want to say is that, I operate according to good faith, integrity, and values. The officers who work with me in the context of representing Haitians, I hope they know by now that I'm a person of integrity. If I say I am bringing a Haitian to an immigration interview on X date, not only will I show up, but I will be the one following up with immigration officers saying the interview was supposed to take place at X time. Where are you? We're here. We just want to make sure everything flows smoothly. Mm-hmm. And that's because I'm a person of my word.
Yes. We
can't have a system where we cannot count on that type of, what would I call it? Due regard and respect and consideration. Because I'm an officer of the court, and we should be working together towards the same aim, which is security for everybody, respect for dignity, and respect for human rights. We have to have that common purpose. So I would encourage authorities to see me as a partner, to deal with me in a way that, is consistent with the values that we should hold in common. And let's try and find sensible solutions and, that will respond to the human rights issue as well as balance the security interests.
Mm-hmm. My final question this morning then is do you know whether or not there are plans by the government to address any form of any reform as it relates to asylum procedures to sort of align with international standards?
I'm not aware of any process, but we in civil society can no longer wait for the government, because this is over a year now since the first group arrival. And so what we will be doing on our end in terms of Freedom Imaginary's work is consulting with stakeholders and developing a rights-based framework that we can present to Jamaica and the Caribbean on how we think or what we think a rights-based comprehensive approach for the protection of Haitian migrants and asylum seekers could be. Bearing in mind the limited capacity and all of the arguments that the government puts forward, this framework will present solutions that are doable and that we think will uphold the rights and the rule of law while balancing security interests.
Ms. Alleyne, I'd like to thank you once again for your time and your thoughts. I wish you a wonderful day. All the best to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, our pleasure. Talking there with the founder of Freedom Imaginaries. She's an international human rights attorney, and this troubling matter of Haitians arriving on our shores and then shortly thereafter, usually within days, the government repatriating them back to Haiti. Without, as Ms. Alleyne says, due process. What are your thoughts on this issue, listeners? Let me hear from you. 876-861-4753. That's 876-861-4753. And there's also 877-255-3086.